This video has been made on behalf of the Primary Business Partnership to help you plan your primary session. The aim of this session is to provide you with some pedagogical theory and advice to help you plan, prepare, and deliver a successful session. You may have a really good idea for an activity that will form the basis of your primary session. We need to have a look at how we can plan this session to ensure it is a success, rather than just going ahead and hoping that it works and taking away the element of luck. So to ensure we deliver a really successful session, we need to consider more than just the activity itself. We need to think about why the learners are doing it. What do we actually want them to get out of the session? We need to think about accessibility. Are the pupils able to engage in your session? We also need to think about the best ways to structure and time your session around your activity. Hopefully, with these considerations in place, we can guarantee that the session will be fun, engaging, there will be learning, and also inspiration going forwards. In planning the outcomes for our session, we're thinking about what knowledge or what skills or what experiences we want learners to take away from your session. What we're not doing is we're not just simply providing a checklist of activities which they're going to undertake within the session. To give our outcomes this layer of depth, to think about what the pupils are able to take away from the session, it might be useful to write them in the style of what will pupils be able to do? And you might have some verbs in mind appropriate to your activity or your session. It could be that we really just want them to be able to go home and tell their parents about what they've done. Or it could be that we've given them the skills or knowledge base to continue working on something. It's often difficult to make these type of outcomes measurable, but certainly if they did go home and tell their parents about what they've done, we know that we have had some impact that is more meaningful than them just completing an activity in class. Whenever we deliver a session, we always want to ensure we can engage every pupil in the classroom. Now, it could be that your activity or your session has a prerequisite level of skill or understanding, in which case it might be worth thinking about if it is appropriate for all year groups or perhaps specific higher year groups. If you're unsure, it would be worth consulting with either a classroom teacher or a primary business partnership consultant to see if your activity is suitable for the lower age groups. Regardless of what year group your session is delivered to, there will always be a mixture of different levels within the classroom, and designing an activity or a session to meet the needs of these different levels can be challenging. It's what we refer to as differentiation. Now, we need to ensure that everyone can access the core of your activities, but it's much easier to take a simple task and make it more challenging for the pupils who perhaps advance with it further than it is to simplify a complex task for the needs of the lower level learners. An analogy of this concept would be taking a simple recipe, and it could be that this is equivalent to your basic building blocks of your main activity in your session. We can then make it more challenging and complex as we go to meet the needs of the higher learners. However, if my learning outcomes were for everyone to produce a complex dish, it's then much harder for me to think about how can we make it simpler. This concept is also important to follow when it comes to understanding the motivational needs of the learners. For instance, it's much more motivational to take a basic task and ask people to have a go at something more challenging than it is to present a challenging task and then tell them to effectively give up and try something simpler instead. If you already have an activity in mind or drafted, it's worth taking the time to think about what are the building blocks of your activity, or what are the building blocks of your main outcomes. This way, when we present it to the pupils, we can break it down into the simple steps, but still challenge those who need challenging. For instance, I was delivering a session that required teams to work as businesses to construct models. But at the most basic level, they were establishing a little business. So in my mixed year group classes, some of the younger pupils focused on the kind of branding and company logo side of things, while some of the older students focused on the construction and the actual buying, selling and trading side of things. When breaking an activity down into its building blocks, we can then analyse if we are making any of these individual tasks too difficult. Does anything have a certain level of complexity or a procedure? For instance, an academic procedure that may not have been taught yet, or are we asking a physical capability that very young pupils may find difficult? Cognitive load refers to how much we're asking the brain to do at any one time, and it's generally accepted that we can't really ask more than 4 or 5 different processes at any one time. However, for younger pupils in the primary school, we may only expect the brain to be able to process 1 or 2 different things simultaneously. We refer to this as process memory if we're having to store information while undertaking other tasks. If we're giving instruction, how are you actually giving instruction? What vocabulary are you using? And are you using any visuals to support what you're actually asking the pupils to do? A task can be difficult if we don't know why we're doing it, so perhaps make it clear what we're expecting of the pupils at any given time. And also be aware about the timing. Are you asking pupils to do something that you might be able to do in a few minutes, but might take a younger pupil much longer? A rushed session will not make for a good session, and so it's worth thinking about the things that can take longer than anticipated. And often, for those less familiar with the classroom environment, these can be surprising. If you're having any form of discussion or you're doing any question asking, allow the pupils to express themselves and allow them to think about responses. So often we can budget ourselves 2 or 3 minutes just to allow the pupils to think and gather their thoughts. Don't try and rush a questioning session. When you're giving instruction, you may have to explain things either 1 or 2 ways, or you may simply have to repeat yourself. On that basis, giving clear instruction can often take more time than if you were explaining it to another adult. Give yourself time to support pupils. It may be that the task you've had in mind is actually proving more difficult than you first anticipated, so give yourself time to wander around the room and support the pupils. Having a time plan where you budget yourself 5 minutes for one task, it's amazing how quickly that 5 minutes can fly by. If you have a session that incorporates any kind of competition judging, then again, like the discussion, give yourself enough time so that there is good interaction around the room. At the end of the session, are you planning to do some kind of plenary that sums up what you've covered? And also, are you doing anything that requires a serious amount of tidying or collecting back in resources? These are all things that often can just be budgeted 5 minutes in a plan, but may take 10 to 15 minutes in reality. If you're unsure on any of these things, don't be afraid to ask for help. So for instance, a primary business partnership consultant or even a classroom teacher at the school you're working with would all be happy to help you. If you're able to, test out your activity, not necessarily on pupils, but just on other adults to get their input. They may have things that you haven't thought about that you may wish to include or adapt. Perhaps the most important thing to take away from this is to have fun in the classroom, because when pupils see you relaxed and enjoying yourself, it will be incredibly motivating for them, and hopefully they'll want to ask you about your career, your role, and learn more about what you're actually doing rather than just your intended outcomes. Thank you for taking the time to watch this short video. I hope you have fun in your session.